There are some players whose first start in the NFL is memorable for all the right reasons. Anytime you get to start an NFL game, you're part of an exclusive club as it is, and you've accomplished your goal, having officially made it in the league. You get to hear your name on the loudspeakers and hear yourself getting introduced, and you are entrusted with getting the team off to a good start. By itself, that's incredible. And when your first start is amazing, because you never forget your first, it's remembered forever. Cam Newton's first start featured him throwing for over 400 yards, immediately establishing himself as a good quarterback. Marcus Mariota's first start involved him finishing the game with a perfect passer rating in a winning effort. Will Levis threw 4 touchdowns and no interceptions in a winning effort in his first ever start against the Atlanta Falcons in 2023. The first time Anquan Boldin started a game, the wideout had 10 catches for 217 yards and 2 touchdowns, torching the Detroit Lions in 2003. You get the idea. Your first start is a monumental event and is a celebration of everything that you built up to at that point in your career. And when you start a game for the first time ever and play well, people take notice. This, however, is not one of those stories. Because this man right here that you've been watching this entire time is Green Bay Packers running back Gary Ellerson. And his first start was memorable for all the wrong reasons. Now, unless you're a Packers fan or a Lions fan, odds are you've never heard of this man before today's video. And it's not hard to see why. The man only played 3 seasons in the NFL and picked up 688 rushing yards and 8 rushing touchdowns. There were some picks from the 7th round of the 1985 NFL Draft that did a lot and contributed in a variety of ways, from kicker Fuad Rivez, who made it to a Pro Bowl with the Minnesota Vikings in 1994, to wide receiver Eric Martin, who had over 8,000 yards and nearly 50 touchdowns, to offensive tackle Joe Walter, who started 136 games in 12 years with the Cincinnati Bengals and was an instrumental part of their offensive line for years. Gary Ellerson was not one of those guys. But 40 years after he got drafted, he might be best remembered today for the time he started his first ever game. Because, oh man, to say that it did not go well would be putting it lightly. To kick off the 1986 season, Ellerson got the starting spot at running back for the Packers' Week 1 game against the Houston Oilers, even though he had no business starting the game, as you'll soon find out. And when you hear head coach Forrest Gregg and his bizarre explanation for why he ended up starting the contest, not only will you scratch your head at how much it defied logic and all rational thinking, but you'll wonder how the heck this man ever made it to the Super Bowl as a head coach. Because this is the story behind Gary Ellerson and the most confusing and dumbest start by any player in Green Bay Packers history. Make sure you hit that like button down below, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss a single video that we post on the channel. Because we post every single day on here about the weird and the wacky history of the NFL with stories like this one they may not have heard of before. So if you like that sort of stuff, then this is definitely the place for you. Thanks in advance for liking and subscribing and for helping us grow this community. And with that in mind, let's talk about Gary Ellerson's start from Hellerson. Before I talk about the actual incident in question and how Ellerson played and the bizarre explanation for why he got the starting spot, we need some context to understand the importance of the game at hand and how the game itself was going. It's September 7th, 1986. It's week 1 of a brand new NFL season, and we find ourselves at Lambeau Field for this inter-conference battle between the Green Bay Packers and the Houston Oilers. Obviously, this is a big game, as not only is it opening day, but you really want to get off on the right foot, especially because the year before in 1985, of the 5 teams in the NFC to make it to the playoffs, 4 of them started 1-0. Oddly enough, this was not the first time that the Oilers and Packers met to open up the season, as 3 years before, in 1983, the Packers and Oilers gave the football world a treat with quite possibly the best game of the season, or at least one of them, when the Packers won 41-38 in overtime in a game with 977 combined yards of offense. If this season opener in 1986 was anything like the opener we saw 3 years prior, then we were in for a treat. Spoiler alert, it was not. Because as you might have been able to guess from these highlights of the game, or lowlights if you're a Packer fan, this game was ugly with a capital U. Of all the games in Packer history to open up the season, this might have been the worst one of the bunch, as just about nothing went right for Green Bay, as in front of their home fans, after leading 3-0 early in the first quarter, the Oilers scored the final 31 points of the game to win it by 28, taking it by a final score of 31-3. Randy Wright got the start for the Packers under center, and this was a really bad omen of things to come for the season, which Wright would start all 16 games of, as Wright finished the game going just 10 for 23, completing 43% of his passes with no touchdowns and 1 interception and a passer rating of 48.3, which is really bad. Houston dominated the time of possession, holding onto the ball for nearly 40 minutes, meaning that for 2/3 of the game, Houston had the football. And whereas the Oilers had 23 first downs, moving the ball down the field with ease all game long, the Packers only had 9, meaning that for every 5 first downs the Oilers had, the Packers had 2. It was that bad. Anyone who had any expectations whatsoever for Green Bay entering the 1986 season quickly adjusted their predictions after watching this game, as not only did they lose this game, but they lost their first 6 games, starting the season 0-6 after 6 weeks and 1-9 after 10 weeks. I know it's only 1 week and you don't want to panic after 1 week, but this was the kind of game that you could panic after 1 week and say that Green Bay was going to suck this year, and you would have been 100% in the right. Green Bay legitimately looked like the worst team in football after 1 week, and looked like a poorly coached mess on offense, on defense, and from an in-game management perspective. Bottom line, this game was a train wreck in just about every single way. Having said that, besides the fact that this game was notable for how bad Green Bay played, this game was notable for what happened at running back with who got the start. Because making his first ever start for the Green Bay Packers and his first ever start in the NFL during that Oiler game was this man right here, second-year running back Gary Ellerson out of Wisconsin. In 1985, Ellerson didn't start a single game, but looked promising at times when his number was called toward the end of the season. Over the final 2 weeks of the 1985 season, the Packers went 2-0, and Ellerson had 129 yards rushing on 17 carries, even scoring a 37-yard touchdown during their comeback win against the Lions that helped them get back into the game. Eddie Lee Ivory was the starter for most of the games in 1985, but the former first-round pick was not going to be able to go to start off the 1986 campaign, as after suffering a sprained neck injury during their final preseason game against the New England Patriots, there was now a major question mark in terms of who was going to start the season in the backfield. And it seemed as if it was going to be a 2-horse race for the starting job between Gary Ellis and Gary Ellerson. No, that is not even the slightest bit confusing. 2 guys with basically the same first name and almost identical first parts to their last name playing the same position on the same team. Even the night before the game, head coach Forrest Gregg was super tight-lipped about who was going to get the start in the backfield, as he had no idea whether it was going to be Ellerson or Ellis. In the end, Gregg decided on giving this man right here, Gary Ellerson, the start for opening day. The man looked sharp at the end of last season, looked good when he was out there in camp, and earned the right to make his first ever start for the Oilers game. However, there was just one small problem with Gary Ellerson making this start, and that was the fact that he was not fully healthy. He was on the injury report. While Ellerson looked good in his limited time thus far with the Packers and impressed Forrest Gregg, Gary Ellerson's biggest enemy was his own body. During training camp in 1986, he got injured on not 1, not 2, but 3 separate occasions, and was entering the Oiler game nursing an ankle injury. In fact, all 3 injuries involved the ankle, which is kind of important when you're a running back and need to make cuts and pick up speed. If you're doing it on a bum ankle and an ankle that's been injured 3 separate times in the last 6 weeks, it makes an already hard position borderline impossible and incredibly painful. Still, being on the injury report hasn't stopped players from playing before, obviously. Just because you're listed as questionable doesn't mean that you can't go. Ellerson wanted to go and start the opening game, obviously. And the Packers wanted him to go and start the opening game. So the Packers had Ellerson get the starting nod. It quickly became apparent and evident that this was not a good idea and was not going to work. Because after the first drive of the game, Ellerson, following 3 rushing attempts where he looked pretty slow and had trouble changing directions, limped off the field and was out for the rest of the game. Just a crappy way to make your first start. Not only do you lose 31-3, but you leave the game after 3 carries because your sprained ankle gave out. You don't play past the first drive. And if that was the end of the story, then as much as it would stink, it wouldn't really be much of a story. We see players try and tough it out all the time, and it's not going to work out every time. Sometimes, even with that adrenaline, and even trying to hold out and hope that for the next 3 hours, everything will work out, it doesn't happen. To criticize Forrest Gregg for this seems like Monday morning quarterbacking and seems very much hindsight bias. And if head coach Forrest Gregg said after the game that he saw Ellerson warm up, that Ellerson looked good and seemed like he was healthy enough and strong enough to give it a shot, and that it just didn't work in a live setting, then this is a non-story, and I'm not criticizing Gregg all these years later. If Forrest Gregg said after the game that Ellerson was making good progress, and after consulting with the doctors and watching him run through drills before the game, we thought he looked sharp and he had the green light to go, then again, this is a non-story, and I'm not criticizing Gregg all these years later. If Forrest Gregg said that Ellerson was healthy and then just landed the wrong way and something came up that was unexpected and we had to pull him as a result, again, non-story, and I'm not criticizing Gregg all these years later. But oh no, not even close. Because after the game, head coach Forrest Gregg, in speaking of this man right here, had the dumbest rationale for starting Gary Ellerson. Because, as it turns out, Ellerson had absolutely no business being out there on the field. As Gregg said, in what is somehow a real quote from a coach that made it to a Super Bowl at one point, and at another point in time, was named the AP Coach of the Year, Gary wasn't really ready to play. His ankle was bothering him, but he really wanted to play in the worst way. I watched him warm up, and I could tell he was a little bit tender, but I thought maybe once we got him in the ball game, he'd be okay. He only ran the ball once or twice, and it was obvious that he couldn't play, so we just took him out. And I have so many questions about what the heck Forrest Gregg was thinking with Gary Ellerson and why he was out there if Gregg, in no uncertain terms, said to the press, yeah, the man was really injured and shouldn't have been starting this game. He was really banged up. First off, you saw him warm up, and you could tell he wasn't going to be good enough to go, and that he was tender. But you thought it'd be better during the game? How is that possible? Unless a magic genie was going to come and grant him 3 wishes in between the warm-up and the actual game, how is it possible to watch a guy during warm-ups and think, oh man, this guy is badly injured, but I'm not worried because he'll be fine during the game. During warm-ups, you're not running at full speed. During warm-ups, you're not getting hit. There is no contact. You think it's going to get better with him getting hit by 280-pound defensive linemen and linebackers going at 20 miles an hour? You think it's going to get better when he's getting pelted in every direction? How does that make sense? That's like saying if you wake up with a migraine and you can't deal with any kind of noise and can't see anything, but it'll get better once you go to your job as a preschool teacher. That's like blowing out your back while putting and thinking it's going to get better once you get on the tee box and start using your driver. That's like blowing out your back while stretching and thinking it's going to get better once you try squatting with weights. Like, you get how that's dumb, right? You get why this is a really bad line of thinking and why this is a rationale that makes no sense at all. The man didn't look good during the non-contact portion and looked like he was really struggling to move and couldn't put any weight on his ankle. But you thought it would get better during that contact portion, where now, instead of just having to compete against his own body, he'd have to compete against other guys trying to bring him down and make contact with the ankle? Forrest Gregg was completely off his rocker by this point and had no business being a head coach in the NFL. This wasn't even the only dumb decision he made during the game, because we'll get to one of those in a future video. But if this is the line of logic that you're applying with any player, let alone a guy like this man right here in Gary Ellerson, then maybe you need to reevaluate how your brain operates and how you think. If your first line in explaining why you played Gary Ellerson is that Gary wasn't really ready to play and his ankle was bothering him, and your second line is he looked pretty bad in warm-ups and looked like that ankle was giving him fits, then maybe, just maybe, here's a thought, you don't play Gary Ellerson. At least this wasn't Ellerson's only start of his career, as he got his next start a few weeks later in Week 5 against the Cincinnati Bengals, in a game that the Packers lost, but a game where he found the end zone twice on the ground and had over 100 yards from scrimmage. So that start went way better than the Oilers' start. I should also note that of his 8 career starts in the NFL, with 6 of them coming with the Packers in 1986, and 2 of them coming with the Lions in 1987 in his final season, he truly had some of the most bizarre starts ever, with that Oiler game being one of them, a 1987 start during the strike, and a Week 7 start against the Cleveland Browns, where he had 7 carries for 1 yard. Yes, you heard that right. 7 carries for 1 yard in a winning effort. As bizarre of a stat line in a win as you're going to see. Bottom line, Gary Ellerson, this man right here, had no business starting opening day of the 1986 season. Not because of a skill issue, but because the man literally could not go. If you see that your player has an ankle injury, you see no improvement with that ankle, you see that player struggle in pregame warmups with that bad ankle, and you decide to play him anyway under the assumption that it will get better in a faster, more violent setting, then I don't know what to tell you. I really don't. Because you truly lack all logic and sound thinking. Because when it came to the decision to start Gary Ellerson on opening day of the 1986 season against the Houston Oilers, head coach Forrest Gregg really couldn't see the forest for the trees. Check out our live streaming schedule for the next few days. We're live every single day on this channel, whether we're covering a sporting event or playing GeoGuessr or just taking your requests. So make sure you like and subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss a single time that we go live and so that you can join this community. Also, thanks to all our members and our Patreon supporters who get exclusive perks like their name at the end of each video, members-only Q&A streams, and cool emojis to use on videos and during streams. See how you can join this community and become a member or a Patreon member by clicking the link in the description below.